to the people on TalkRadio 1380 WNRR Augusta, where the radio revolution is brewing. Tony Powers along with Demetrius Minor. And joining us on the phone is Richard Lim, who has a great website that I've been admiring here for the past few hours. It's called firstinpeace.com, and it's all about our first president, George Washington. He's a good friend of Demetrius, and good afternoon, Mr. Lim. Glad to have you on board.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Demetrius. It's good to be here on Washington's birthday. I appreciate you guys taking the time to have me on.
No problem. I just want to let the audience know real quick before we get into the conversation. I met Richard when I was a White House intern in 2006, and he was employed with the Department of Labor, and he's also worked with the White House under the George W. Bush administration. Just graduated, just finished grad school at Syracuse. Right.
Yes.
And real quick, being in New York, I know you're probably happy that Carmelo Anthony is now in New York Knicks.
If it's far away from the Lakers, that's good for me. Just
All right.
As long as it's better for the Lakers. That's my plug. I know you're not a fan, Demetrius.
I'm not a Laker fan, but we won't go there.
No one's perfect.
No one's perfect. And
we
Richard,
can still be friends.
That's right. Richard is also a blogger for Americans for Informed Democracy. And
yes.
Welcome to the program, Richard.
Thank you. Happy President's Day. Happy Washington's Day. Washington's birthday, of course.
That's right. It's funny. I don't know if you watch MSNBC or not, but did you happen to see the thing Chris Matthews did last night on MSNBC?
Unfortunately, no, I did not.
Well, probably a good thing. We won't go into that now. I'm going to play that a little later on for the folks. But this is an incredible source of information that you've put together here on this website. What inspired you to put together firstinpeace.com?
I had been studying George Washington. I had been studying the founders for a long time. It's kind of funny how I got interested in George Washington. It was kind of in the most unlikely of places. I was actually in China with my family, and I'm Filipino, but my stepdad, he's Chinese. And so we were meeting a lot of the relatives and everything, and I was talking to a lot of them, and they didn't know English, so we were kind of, getting translated and talking to each other. And basically, some of his relatives, were talking about politics, and they weren't very happy with a lot of what America was doing at the time. This was around 2007. But we talked about history, and they said, there's one figure I really admire, and that's George Washington. And it was kind of random. I kind of thought, oh, that's interesting. I mean, I wonder why, someone 200-something years later after Washington lived in a totally different culture would be interested in someone like George Washington. And I thought, well, there must be something to this guy. If to him, he kind of represents America and even years later can have that kind of inspirational impact. So I started studying about him, and I realized that there's a lot about George Washington that's so different from any other leader in history, and that makes him so uniquely American, and that makes him someone that I think all Americans can be proud of. And then at the same time, I kind of felt, well, this generation today, we're so caught up in here and now. We're so caught up in, who's the biggest thing, for 15 minutes, and then, we move on to someone new. And we've forgotten where we've come from. And my dad actually was the one who inspired me to do it. He does website design, and I can't take credit for most of how it looks because he's the one that's really techie. He's good at that. And he inspired me to do it. He said, well, you've been studying George Washington for a few years. Why don't you share it with other people? And I just thought, that's a great idea. And he helped me get set up. And I used a lot of the sources that, the books that I've been reading about Washington. And it's been a real labor of love because it's allowed me to share, my passion with other people and, of course, get other people's input as well.
Well, George Washington was unique. And of course, the fact that going to his finest hour, one of the headers on your website here, And
favorite part.
Yeah, the thing that I think makes Washington unique in history, in the history of military conquerors or leaders of movements that have actually conquered and won, and George Washington, of course, the leader of the American Revolutionary Forces, and he wins this war, and then when he resigned his commission in 1783. And then he stepped down from the presidency in 1797. As you write on your website, he joined Roman hero Cincinnatus as among the few to ever refuse absolute power, and certainly was the first major figure in the modern world to do so. And you also write, it's difficult to recover the amazement of the world upon hearing the news of Washington's resignation in 1783. How did the rest of the world take it when George Washington said, well, thank you very much, I've done my part, I'm going to hand this off to somebody else now?
Yeah, no, it's interesting because, we have the advantage of hindsight. We look back at history, we know how things turned out. We know that after Washington, he had 8 years as president, and then after him, we've had so many other presidents, and most of them, except for Franklin Roosevelt, most of them stuck to the two-term limit. At the time, that definitely was not inevitable. At the time, the Constitution had no limit on how many terms a president can serve. So people looked at that and said, oh, well, it is very possible that a president could get in there and then stay in there for life. Some delegates wanted that, Alexander Hamilton and a few others. And so, you look at that and you have to think there's no precedent for this. There's no two-term limit. There's no, stepping down from power. And then you have to look at who was in charge. It's interesting because, if you go to Wikipedia, I did not use Wikipedia for all my information, but if you go to Wikipedia and you go type in 1783, the year, and it's interesting because you can look at who was the leader, who were leaders at the time, all over the world. Who was leader? King